Now we're going to get to a guy by the name of George Gurdjieff. Just to give you a heads up, there are three main modern figures associated with the development of the Enneagram. They are George Gurdjieff, Oscar Chazo, and Claudio Naranjo. And so we're going to start with the first man, George Gurdjieff, who lived from 1866 to 1949. And it's just, I want to point out that as Gurdjieff was doing his thing, that's when Freud and modern psychology was starting to come about in the world. So Enneagram history often begins with George Gurdjieff because the Enneagram symbol, the exact symbol that we have today and use, makes its first appearance in history through him and his students. So I'll just repeat that. The first time that we see the actual Enneagram symbol that we use today shows up in George Gurdjieff in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay, and George Gurdjieff wrote a book called Meetings with Remarkable Men. It was an autobiographical novel. And in this book, he describes him and one of his friends discovering an old parchment in the ruins of a monastery in modern-day Turkey. And in that parchment, they find the mentioning of an ancient brotherhood called Sarmang. And so this was a secret esoteric Sufi group called the Sarmang Brotherhood. And they actually made a movie. A director came to and made a movie of this book. And so you can go find it on YouTube. And in this movie, it shows a bunch of kids or teenagers going to this, these ruins and finding this ancient book, and they open it up, and on one of the pages of the parchment is the Enneagram symbol. And that's why some people think the Enneagram we have today is actually ancient, has been passed down from generation to generation. It came through the Sufis, and it came to George Gurdjieff. But here's the deal, and we'll keep talking about this and explaining this and teasing this out more, that wherever Gurdjieff may have stumbled upon the Enneagram diagram, what we do know for sure is that what he received and what he taught was not a personality system. How do we know that? Well, because Gurdjieff never taught or wrote about the Enneagram as a personality system. Okay, so we can just look at his writings to figure that out. So what did he contribute? There's probably a lot more than these. So again, I don't want to downplay his significance. But here are four teachings that I think have carried over into a lot of Enneagram teaching today. So the first one is the idea of waking up. So he thinks that we are all sleepwalking through life and that we need to be awakened in our consciousness. So that was a big teaching of his. He also taught that we are three-brained beings. So that he said that we are three-brained beings, meaning that we are intellectual, emotional, and moving. And so the modern Enneagram centers of intelligence mirror these three brains or ways of knowing: the head, the heart, and the body or gut centers, which all of you are probably familiar with. And using all three of these centers, he called the fourth way. Okay, so this can be traced back to Gurdjieff. Another one of his teachings was that we had have a chief feature. And this may have influenced the modern Enneagram in the sense that each person has a chief feature. So let me just show you a quote from Gurdjieff about this. He says, "Every man has a chief feature in his character which is central. It's like an axle around which all his false personality revolves. Every man's personal work must consist in struggling against this chief fault." So we didn't get a chance to talk about Dante because of time limitations, but Dante took the vices and basically said that we need to spend time thinking about our vice. This aspect of chief fault is kind of similar. Like we need to figure out what our chief fault is, around which the false personality revolves, and then do some work. And some of the examples of chief features that I found in Gurdjieff's work were never at home, does not exist, argues about everything, no conscience, lack of shame. And so these are some of the chief features that I found. So as you can see, these chief features never made their way into the modern Enneagram, but this chief feature may have given Oscar Chazo some tracks to run on as he was developing the vice, as he was putting the vices around the Enneagram later on. And so we'll get to that. Okay. And then lastly, and this is obvious, but the biggest contribution to the Enneagram was just the symbol itself. So, hey, let's talk about the symbol for a little bit. Let's decode this symbol. The obvious thing is that it's not a pentagram. I like to point that out to religious folk. Like, okay, penta means 5, ennea means 9 in Greek. So one is a 5-pointed diagram. Another one is a 9-pointed diagram. So sorry, folks, the Enneagram is not a symbol of devil worship. We can put that to rest. So, what did the Enneagram symbol mean to Gurdjieff if it wasn't a typology? Well, the Enneagram symbol to him was a means of explaining all universal truths. It was a blueprint for understanding all of life. And here's one example of what Gurdjieff was doing with the Enneagram. So here you can see him placing musical octaves around the diagram. So if you've been in music, had music theory, do, re, mi, fa, you can go around the octaves there. And he would also put like days of the week around it. He was putting all kinds of things around it. Why? To understand how the world works, not just personality, but just the entire world. And he used to teach the law of 1, the law of 3, and the law of 7 using this diagram. And so those are things that have carried over into some Enneagram teachers' trainings. For the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about the law of 7. But the law of 7 basically means that we are to be in motion. So Gurdjieff, I found a quote that I wanted to show you. It says, "To be understood, the Enneagram needs to be thought of as being in motion. A fixed Enneagram is a dead symbol." So we have Gurdjieff to thank for this idea that even as you think about the lines and arrows today, the Enneagram is not static, it's dynamic. We're moving from stress to security. We're growing, we're integrating. That's what George Gurdjieff was getting at. And so let's talk about the math for a little bit, because sometimes this is not taught or well known, and it's very fascinating. So the law of 7 is about, mathematically speaking, is about taking any number divided by 7. If you take 1 divided by 7, you get 0.14285, 1.42857. So there's this repeating pattern. If you take 2 divided by 7, you'll still find the 0.14285 in the pattern. If you take 3 divided by 7, you'll still find 1.42857. And so this is fascinating. So if you look at the order of the numbers, you'll start to see a pattern, right? It's under stress, Enneagram 1s. If you look at the first number on there, 1, Enneagram 1s go to 4, and then 4s go to 2, 2s go to 8, and so on. Then you can go backwards on the path of security. So look at 7 at the end of that pattern. 7s going backwards go to 5, 5s go to 8, 8s go to 2s, 2s go to 4s, and 4s go to 1. So just really fascinating. When I first saw this, I'm like, how have I not heard this before? So there you go. We've decoded the ancient Enneagram symbol.